Orthodox Egyptologists, guardians of conventional wisdom, have woven a tapestry of half-truths and omissions, concealing a deeper, more profound understanding of ancient Egypt that threatens the very foundations of their academic edifices. Okay, that's one perspective. Now let's hear the other. The mysteries of ancient Egypt deserve serious inquiry, not the distorted narratives of those pyramidiates who warp evidence to fit deluded visions of the past. So we have a dichotomy, or at least we seem to. Sometimes we're asked to take sides in something as a way to suck us in. Everyone takes sides, and then both A and B have much more attention and support than they had before. But those that are sucked in are entering a polarised field of conflict when they could be enjoying discovery, wonder, and understanding for its own sake. So I ask you here to rise out of the sense of dichotomy and find a balance between healthy, intuitive speculation and sensible, reasoned argument. I think an intriguing geometric mystery underpins the foundation of dynastic Egypt, but this is all grounded within the realms of plausibility and based on sound reasoning. Ancient Egypt conceived of itself as being not one land, but two lands that were harmoniously united and delicately poised in equilibrium, as if to create an unpolarized field, so to speak. In Egyptian myth, there was an ideal period where Osiris and Isis ruled. Then Osiris was murdered and their young son Horus ruled in Lower Egypt, while his uncle Seth ruled in Upper Egypt. And these two lands quarrelled, but then a measurement took place with a set of scales to find the boundary that would resolve the dispute and bring peace. And once peace had been established, the two lands were reunited. And right through ancient Egyptian history, kings would continue to be seen as uniters of the two lands. There were several paired symbols standing for these two lands. There was the bee of Lower Egypt and the sedge of Upper Egypt, with kings having a sedge and bee name, as he of the sedge and bee. There was the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt, which were merged to form the unified crown. Then there were the two ladies, which was the epithet referring jointly to the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt and the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt. One of the main royal titles was the two ladies name, where kings were he of the two ladies, and the cobra head and vulture head of these goddesses were brought together on the front of crowns as the uraeus. Then there were the paired symbols of the lotus or lily of Upper Egypt and the papyrus of Lower Egypt, with these plants being represented in the form of great pillars of temples. If we want to combine something of the excitement of the maverick alternative historian with the plausibility of the orthodox Egyptologist, it's vital we start by asking the right questions. And the balance of the two lands gives us this. There's a real sense of there being more than meets the eye. Why did unifying the two lands continue to be such a big deal right from the early dynastic period through to the end of antiquity 3,000 years later? Was there more to this than a simple political unification? More specifically, is it just coincidental that the theme of scales links into actual Egyptian surveying practice, or does it hint that some kind of real measuring took place to find this balance point? I think the concept of the balance of the two lands was, in its origin, all about the measurement of latitude at different places according to a geometric scheme. Did the Egyptians have a concept of latitude? Well, in a sense, it was impossible to miss. This guy is Sennacherib. He's an ancient Egyptian who lives in Lower Egypt, and today he's in Syene in Upper Egypt as part of a trip to get syenite granite and ship it down the Nile for statues for the pharaoh's palace. And this guy he's talking to is Nebamun. He's an ancient Egyptian too, but he's a local here in Upper Egypt. They've been talking about how today is the longest day with the sun on its highest trajectory, what we call the summer solstice. And now Nebamun, the Upper Egyptian, says how interesting it is that on the summer solstice the obelisks don't cast a shadow at noon. Sennacherib is surprised and said he's never heard of this, but noon comes and he observes the phenomenon with interest. So anyway, next year at the summer solstice he's back in Lower Egypt to the north and tells some people, here they are, to gather around the obelisk in Heliopolis and wait for a surprise. He's feeling smug, can't wait to show off his knowledge. But it doesn't happen. The obelisk casts a shadow just like normal. Look at him, poor Senegem, deflated. Gonna take him a while to claw back some dignity. We'll catch up on him later and see how he's getting on. My point here is that in ancient Egypt, the fact that shadows have different lengths depending on how north or south you are along the Nile couldn't have been kept a secret. The ancient Egyptians loved measuring stuff as accurately as they could and calculating stuff, as shown for example by the formula for the volume of a truncated pyramid contained in the text known as the Moscow Papyrus. And they were used to observing obelisk shadows for use as sundials to tell the time during the day. And if you measure the different lengths of shadows at different places at the same time on the same day, you can actually use this as a measure of how north or south those places are relative to each other. We also know that the ancient Egyptians believed that measure and proportion had divine qualities that were important. So for example, in the images of gods and pharaohs adorning the temples, the artists had to adhere to an ancient system of proportions and the use of grids to ensure that the depictions were created in the correct way. Bearing this in mind, it seems highly likely that they thought of the division of Upper and Lower Egypt in the same way. The elevation angle of stars also changes directly with latitude. The star shafts from the chambers in the Great Pyramid were aimed at the culmination of particular stars on the meridian due north and south, implying that measurements of the elevations of these stars had been made. Again, if they made the same measurements at, say, Thebes in Upper Egypt, they'd have quickly noticed the change in angle. Stars actually would have provided a more accurate way to measure latitude than sun shadows, because sun shadows are blurry. It's thought that in the age of the Giza pyramids, due north was found by waiting till two of the circumpolar stars, Kochab and Mizar, were directly lined up vertically with each other by checking with a plumb bob. The pole of the sky was midway between them. Now, all they would have had to do is similarly notice when these two stars were horizontally lined up, and they would have had the elevation angle of the pole, which is one and the same as latitude. Plumb bobs of this type were also used on Egyptian sets of scales to check they were balanced and level, which could explain why a latitude measurement could be likened to measuring with a set of scales. I'm going to talk a bit about the Great Pyramid. One of the things that makes this pyramid a bit different from most of the others is that the burial chamber wasn't under the pyramid, but actually in the body of the pyramid. And this involved impressive feats of engineering. They were making things a lot more difficult for themselves by doing it this way. Why did they bother? It was the famous Egyptologist Flinders Petrie who first suggested that the height on which the king's chamber was placed within the pyramid was not chosen randomly, but was in fact based on a geometric ratio. If this is a cross-section of the Great Pyramid, and the line here is at the floor level of the king's chamber, then the area above that line is equal to the area below it. And the same applies to the surface area on the outside of the pyramid, above and below that line. The maths behind this is not very difficult. Take a look at this. If we have a square divided into triangles, the blue ones form a smaller square set within the larger one, tilted at 45 degrees. This smaller square, the blue one, is made up of 4 of the little triangles. The rest of the large square is shown yellow. This yellow area is also made up of 4 of the little triangles, so the blue area and the yellow area are equal. Now, if we rotate the blue square without changing its size, its corners, as it rotates, generate this circle. So here, the blue area is the same as it was before, so the yellow area must still be the same area too. And now, imagine that we're looking at the top of a pyramid, and we can see the yellow area is the surface area of the pyramid that is below the king's chamber's floor level, and the blue is the surface area above. And for the cross section of the pyramid, or indeed any triangle, we can look at just 1/4 of this pattern to see the basic principle of it. So by looking at just this quarter, we have a triangle where the top part is blue and the bottom is yellow, but still the blue and yellow areas are equal to each other. And this geometry can be generated with just squares and circles, so we can see how both the construction of this ratio and the proof of it are based on simple geometry. This type of geometrical calculation fits very well into the context of ancient Egypt. The Rhind and the Moscow mathematical papyri, for example, include calculations of different types of area, including triangles, squares and pyramids, and areas of land. The Rhind papyrus includes a calculation involving a circle circumscribed by a square, and a calculation of the areas of trapezoidal segments of a triangle, and the Berlin papyrus includes a calculation relating to the relative sizes of squares with different side lengths. Now the key thing here is that the Pharaoh's palace was in Memphis, the city which, being at the border of Upper and Lower Egypt, was held to be at the balance of the two lands, Mekhat Tawi. Memphis was the Old Kingdom Pyramid Age capital, continued to be of primary sacred and administrative importance right through Pharaonic Egypt, even when the royal household and court were transferred to Thebes in Upper Egypt. The establishment of Memphis as the Old Kingdom capital is central to this notion of the balance of the two lands. The ancient Egyptian traditions tell how Thoth resolved a territorial dispute by finding the balance of the two lands using his great set of scales. So in life, in the Old Kingdom, the king resided at the balance of upper and lower, and indeed maintained order by upholding the harmonious unification of the two lands, upper and lower. And this is what is reflected in the Great Pyramid. The king's sarcophagus, in death, rested on the floor level that was itself at the balance of upper and lower. This is what caused me to wonder, was the balance of the lands idea, in its original conception, geometric not just in this symbolic representation within the Great Pyramid, but in some manner that had to do with relative latitudes? So is Memphis somehow at a latitude that divides Egypt into upper and lower according to this same mathematical ratio? The first thing we can do is find the latitude of the northernmost tip of Egypt. This can be done very easily on Google Maps. You just click on the spot, and at the bottom of the Google Maps screen, you're given latitude and longitude figures. The latitude is 31.602. The southern latitude we take as that of the Great Temple of Luxor in Thebes, the capital of Upper Egypt, and this is 25.698. If we use the mathematical formula to find the balance of the land's latitude between these, it comes out as 29.873. Now we can see where this falls on the map. This latitude runs through the pyramid field of Saqqara, just a fraction north of the stepped pyramid of Djoser, which is within that pyramid field of Saqqara. The pyramid of Djoser being at 29.872 as compared to this latitude we've just found of 29.873. The Egyptians would have needed another step to compare angles, as they didn't express them in simple units, but as a ratio of the run and rise of a right-angled triangle. Let's now have a look at part of the Egyptian text from the Shabaka stone, which claims itself to have been copied from an Old Kingdom text. He judged between Horus and Seth. He ended their quarrel. He made Seth the king of Upper Egypt and Horus king of Lower Egypt, up to the place in which his father was drowned, which is division of the two lands. Thus Horus stood over one region and Seth stood over one region. They made peace over the two lands at Ayan. This was the division of the two lands. Then Horus stood over the land. He is the unifier of this land, proclaimed in his great name Tar-Tenon, south of his wall, Lord of eternity. Then sprouted the two great magicians upon his head. He is Horus, who arose as king of Upper and Lower Egypt, who united the two lands in the nome of the wall. Reed and papyrus were placed on the double door of the house of Ptah. That means Horus and Seth, pacified and united. They fraternized so as to cease quarrelling in whatever place they might be, being united in the house of Ptah, the balance of the two lands in which Upper and Lower Egypt had been weighed. So notice that the above not only refers to a political unification, but also to a measuring, a weighing and a balance to find the location of Memphis. This text says that the place where the lands were divided was Ayan, and this is known to be a rocky outcrop across the Nile from Saqqara and a little way north of Memphis. The text also refers to the primordial mound, Tar Tenan, risen land, and to the plants, reed and papyrus, which grew on this mound when it rose above the waters, order emerging out of formlessness. The stepped pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara is thought to have been equated with this primordial mound. While we think of the Great Pyramid of Giza as the greatest of the pyramids, for the ancient Egyptians themselves, the most sacred of these structures was this one at Saqqara. It was the first of the pyramids, and indeed the first large monumental structure designed by Imhotep. Intriguingly, in the underground maze of tunnels beneath the stepped pyramid are some faience panels that display the geometry that creates this ratio. These are made from many blue-green glazed tiles inset with a shallow arch pattern, the arch being held up by the Djed pillars.
Finally, here's an image from the coffin of a 20th dynasty noble, which shows the god Sokar under a stepped structure. As well as being a god thought to rule over a certain region of the sun's nightly underworld journey, the hawk-headed mummified god Sokar was also the god of the Memphite necropolis, his lands being the desert sands outside Memphis that included Saqqara, and it's even been suggested that Saqqara may be named after him. The stepped structure in this necropolis is the stepped pyramid of Djoser. Now we can note that the two ladies symbols, the vulture of Upper Egypt and the cobra of Lower Egypt, are in the image, one on each side of the stepped structure. This places the structure at the dividing place between the two lands, just as we found that the geometric latitude runs right through the Saqqara necropolis, close to the stepped pyramid. It's not possible to say for sure that this is what the image is supposed to depict, but if it is just a coincidence, then it's a striking one.
The depiction is really a version of the scenes from the Book of the Dead, where Osiris and/or Sokar, or the composite Osiris-Sokar, waits in the chamber under the mound of Sokar to receive the deceased into the afterlife. Other examples are shown here. Notice how the roof of the chamber beneath the mound of Sokar recalls the geometry we've been looking at.
Before I sign off, I said we'd check in with Sennacherib to find out how he's getting on. After his setback with the obelisk's shadow, instead of sinking into a slump, he was motivated to find out what was going on. This led him to carry out some investigations and discover that the altitudes of the heavenly bodies change in a regular way as you go north and south, and that as such this angle change could be used to carry out geodetic measurements. Here he is talking to a priestess in one of the temples, explaining what he's worked out. Turns out the priests and priestesses already knew about this, but all the same they're impressed with how he's worked it out on his own and have decided to allow him to train to be a priest, which he's over the moon about, as you can see. Well done, Sennacherib.